Good afternoon. Today is February 5th, 2019. My name is Travis Hearn, and we will be conducting the Farm to School Grant Reviewer Training. I'll be joined during this presentation by Anna Aerosmith. She's one of the grants officers who helps with the Farm to School program, and she will be assisting during the review process as well. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who is joining us today, whether live or on the recording. Thank you so much for your flexibility and being available on an alternative day to help us continue the review process. Before we begin, I'm going to linger on this slide for a little bit, just so anyone who may not be able to hear my voice can see the information on here. Remember that audio is through your computer speakers, so if you're having difficulty listening, just turn up the volume on your computer. And if at any point you have trouble with ReadyTalk, maybe it logs you out or you're having difficulties keeping up with the presentation, you can try changing your browser, especially if you're using Internet Explorer. This usually fixes the issue, especially if you switch to Firefox or Chrome. And then if you're still experiencing issues and none of these fix it, one of my colleagues, Aaron Heisem, is providing information in the chat box where you can call in and listen in on an audio-only version of the call. And if none of that fixes the problem and you're still having difficulties, the ReadyTalk helpline is very helpful. It's listed there on this slide, 800-843-9166, in case you want to jot that down really quickly, just to guard against any future problems. As far as how this training will run, if you have any comments or you'd like to ask a question, use the chat function. We'll be flagging those as we go along, and then we will answer all of the questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't have time to get to everyone's questions, you can email us at the Farm to School inbox, farmtoschool@usda.gov, and we will address your question after the presentation. We will also, after the presentation, be sending out the recording of the webinar, and we'll be sending everybody a PDF of the slides that we're presenting today. This is our agenda for today. We'll be establishing a little bit of background about the Farm to School program and the review process in particular, talking about what the grant cycle looks like from beginning to end. This is not all, the review process isn't the only thing covered in the grant cycle overview, but it is the only part that y'all need to worry about. We'll go into the review process in particular. Anna will be joining to give us some tips for success. We'll summarize and then take everybody's questions. To begin with a little bit of background about the Farm to School program, the two main factors that the Farm to School program is designed to address are food education and getting local food into schools. And the authorizing legislation was the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act, Section 243. And one thing I want to note in particular on this slide is that in the past we've awarded up to $5 million each year, but in fiscal year 2019 we will be rewarding $7.5 million. And that, for us, makes your participation and your contribution to this part of the program especially valuable, because we expect that we may end up rewarding more grants, and that's going to make the scores that you come up with and your feedback on the applications very much more important. And you see some of the potential activities here. If you were in our Farm to School 101 webinar earlier this week, then you've heard a little bit more about these in some more detail. And we'll be talking a little bit about what the grant types are again today. This information is contained in the RFA. In fact, much of the information from this slideshow is contained in the request for applications for this grant. These are the eligible entities. These are the bodies that were able to apply to the grant this year and are seeking funding. And these are the grant types. Planning, just to give a brief overview of what we talked about yesterday in case you weren't able to attend or you haven't been able to view the recording yet. Planning grants are for applicants who have not yet done any farm to school activities. They are interested in farm to school activities. Maybe they have minimal experience. They've seen farm to school implemented elsewhere, maybe in adjacent counties or districts or with other organizations. And they are interested in getting started but don't quite have the funding to dedicate to that process yet. So this type of grant is designed to get those interested parties into the process and planning a farm to school program for themselves. The implementation grant is for entities that are already beyond the planning process. They are, as it says, implementing. They are doing farm-to-school activities. And this grant is to help them expand their activities, maybe add additional roles that they perform. And then the final grant type is the training grant, which is for eligible entities to host trainings where they teach attendees about farm-to-school projects, about tactics, about ways to be successful with farm-to-school. And then the attendees are able to leave that training equipped with skills that enable them to be successful in their own farm-to-school endeavors. Next, I'll talk briefly about the entire grant cycle, of which review is just a single part. In 2019, these dates have been slightly adjusted considering the delay that we experienced in late December and January. The RFA was announced in October and applications were due by early December. In early February, we're doing these trainings that we're doing now, and the reviewers will be receiving applications for themselves to look over and to begin rating, which will take place throughout February and March. Reviewers individually and in teams will be reading over these applications and giving them scores based on the information that's contained therein. In March and April, back in the program office, we'll be receiving your scores and using those to calculate rankings for the applications and then sending them to the selection official with the expectation that we'll be able to select and announce grants in June. Now the review process, each reviewer is assigned to a 3-person team, and each group has one person who's the team lead. And we spoke about the 3 grant types just a moment ago in this presentation, but each team will only be responsible for reviewing one type of grant. So your team will only have implementation, only have planning, or only have training grants. And there are 2 key systems that we'll use for the reviewers. The first is Watchdocs, which is the secure system that reviewers use to access applications. And the second is PartnerWeb, which we'll go into much more extensively in this presentation, which is where reviewers will complete score sheets and submit their scores for us to download in Program Office and then use those scores to rank the applications. And I put a note at the bottom that team assignments will be announced this week. That is our very hopeful plan. If not this week, then you should receive your team assignments along with what grant type you'll review next week. The week of February 11th, speaking of next week, is when we hope to have applications distributed to the reviewers, and we expect reviewers to download and start skimming the applications for conflicts of interest. Most of you, if not all of you, have submitted your signed conflict of interest forms. If you're watching this webinar and haven't submitted your conflict of interest form, please do that as soon as possible. We won't be able to grant access to the applications until we've received your signed conflict of interest form. You can always email the Farm to School inbox to check whether we've received your conflict of interest form. And if not, please get that to us as soon as possible. The review period itself will take place from February 19th to March 15th. February 19th is a Tuesday because President's Day is that Monday, but the review process will begin immediately after President's Day. And breaking down that 4-week period even further, February 19th to March 1st is when individuals will review, and we'll talk about this in more detail. And March 4th to March 15th is when the team leads will schedule calls and convene their team to discuss their scores and complete the team review period. After reviews are submitted to us, after we receive the scores, we'll go through the selection process. We'll consider the average scores from each reviewer. This is highly important along with the written feedback. And then we have additional priorities as well, including geographic diversity and the fiscal year 2019 priorities, which we spoke about on the Farm to School 101 webinar. Average scores are then sorted by rank between each grant type, and then the awardees are selected from among that ranking with consideration to the priorities. That list is then sent to the selecting official, and after that there may be some reshuffling to make sure that we meet the legislative priorities and satisfy geographic diversity. But the list is ultimately approved and then vetted with awards announced in May. This year it will likely be in June. And now for the review process itself. These are the preliminary reviewer responsibilities to be aware of, including submitting a conflict of interest form, which I mentioned a moment ago. And each individual reviewer will be responsible for around 10 proposals. They'll submit scores and feedback and participate in the team review and meeting or call. I'll speak about this more later. This may be several brief calls, it may be one long call, but the team lead and the reviewers will work together to find a time that works for everybody. If it's applicable after you've participated in that team review meeting, you may want to update your scores and your feedback to incorporate what people have said about the same applications in the team panel, and then complete the reviewer feedback survey after the process has been concluded. When you're preparing for review, this will mostly be next week. Some of these steps you can even begin this week, such as reviewing the fiscal year 19 request for applications. This was the document that every grantee referred to when they were completing their application. It has the requirements for submitting a complete application with all of the required documentation and all of the required forms. And then there are several additional reference materials that we will make available through PartnerWeb, including the score sheet, which is how you will determine the scores for each grant, the point allocation guidance, which explains how much each category or section in the grant application is worth, and the projects that involve one-sheeters, which is just a guide to let you know what type of language you might see depending on what projects the grantee is interested in performing. We also expect you to access PartnerWeb to familiarize yourself with the system. This will help us mitigate any access issues during the review process itself. We have a 1-week buffer built in next week to hopefully troubleshoot and resolve any PartnerWeb issues, and ultimately download the application. Here's an example of one of our reference materials, the score sheet. It has on the left side the section, how much the section is worth, and what type of information is expected to be contained within this section, and then the score for that section, the score breakdown, which we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide, where the ratings range from excellent, where the content of the application is exemplary, to unresponsive, which typically means that the applicant skipped this section or just did not fill it out in a way that's at all satisfactory or relevant to what information was requested in the RFA. A preview of what we might expect this year based on the types of applications we received last year. The fiscal year 18 average scores were high scoring for planning grants if they received at least an 87, an implementation grant if they received at least an 87.3, and a training grant if they received at least a 90.3. So looking at these scores, you can see kind of the quality of applications that are being recommended for funding. If the application gets really a high B or an A, that's more or less the cutoff. That's about the lowest that grantees or applicants are scoring and still being considered for funding. So that also contributes a little bit to the perspective of how important the review process is and how important it is to be diligent when you're reviewing these applications. Here's another example of the reference materials we'll make available. It's the activity checklist. This is not a form that we'll use to select grantees, but this is something that will be used to understand what information is in the application kind of at a glance instead of having to review the entire application package. But team leads will be the member of the groups who complete this. Now for the independent review guidelines. If you'll remember from a moment ago, the independent review period will run from February 19th to March 1st. This is the time where reviewers work on their own to evaluate applications. We ask that during this time, reviewers not communicate with their teams, they not ask others for feedback. There will be a time in the application period for that, but at this time they should be purely concerned with what their own impression is of the application. You should receive an email to access WatchDocs by February 13th. That, again, is our expected date. We will let you know if there's any reason for delay or if we're unable to meet that deadline. And once you're able to access your applications, we ask that you scan them early and check to make sure you don't have any conflicts of interest. We're trying to assign applications to make sure that there will be an absolute minimum number of conflicts of interest, but they may still happen, and it's important for the reviewers to make sure that they've looked over the materials in the application and inform us of any conflicts ahead of time. In general, you're looking at a conflict of interest if there's some sort of financial interest in the applicant, if you have an existing relationship, or if there's some sort of institutional relationship. If you see any of these things, it's important to contact the farm-to-school inbox at farm2school@usda.gov. If you're even slightly concerned, let us know and we can swap applications. It's really not a huge deal. We just want to make sure that everybody is evaluating applications that they have no stake or personal interest in. As I mentioned before, during the independent review, we really request that you not communicate with the other reviewers on your team at all. Do not talk about the proposals with your teammates. We want to hear your completely raw impression of what the application has in it. After you've read all the applications and scored them, please submit that feedback via PartnerWeb no later than March 1st at 9 a.m. We ask for you to get that information in the morning on March 1st so that the team leads will have time to double check that everybody has that information in before they finally give us the green light to say that this phase of the review has been completed. When you're scoring applications, we ask that you provide both a score and a written feedback. The reason that the written feedback is so important is because after announcements are made, if a grant applicant is rejected, they are able to request that they get a copy of their feedback. So the information that you provide regarding the strengths and weaknesses of the application could potentially be seen by the applicant themselves. It will be completely anonymous. There will be no identifying information whatsoever. But the feedback itself will only be edited in a minor way. For the team review, the period is from March 4th to March 15th. During this time, the team leads are going to host or schedule and host the group discussions. This should be done on a conference call. If there's some way that you're available to meet in person, then that's acceptable, but we recognize that most people will have to schedule a meeting via phone. Each of these calls will have a program representative on the line that will help you get started and will initiate you into this part of the process for your first call. There will be no need to have a program representative join you on future calls, but one of us will be available during that time if you need to call in and ask a question. During these calls, teams are going to discuss each proposal. Each individual should come prepared with their own individual feedback and be prepared to explain why they chose the score that they did, and if they have particular feedback, what caused them to give that feedback specifically. After this, it's okay to go in and update your scores, and in fact, if you see after talking with your teammates that maybe you misunderstood what the applicant was saying in one part and rated them too harshly or too easily, then it's absolutely encouraged to go back and update your scores so that the applicant has the truest measure of the quality of their application. The following is what you can expect when you start looking at grant applications. This list here has each of the sections that appears in a grant application. I will note that this year the length requirements for the narratives were shortened. We did that to make it a little easier for reviewers. We've received feedback in the past that reading these applications takes a very long time and is very work intensive. So we tried to build in some new structures that would help the application process, the review process, not take as long for the reviewers. These sections that are highlighted in green are the ones that should be especially focused on by the reviewers. You can disregard the sections at the beginning and end of the application, but from the table of contents through the support letters, we expect the reviewers to be reading that carefully and basing their scores on the material that's contained in those sections. This is new for this year, that there's a limit on the attachments. If the application includes more than 3 of resumes or support letters, only review 3. In the RFA, you'll see as you read through it that we let applicants know that we would only be considering 3 of each type of attachment. This was also another new policy that we've implemented to help the reviewers not have so much material to read, not so much material to go through, and we're hoping that it'll help streamline the review process. Now I'll be talking about the systems used for review and how the reviewers will receive access to them. You'll get into the applications using WatchDocs, and you'll begin to access WatchDocs after receiving a series of emails. You need take no action after the first email, the Welcome to Workspaces email, but in the second one you'll get a 6-digit authentication code, and in the third one you will get the email that you actually open and begin navigating to the Farm to School folder. That's where you will use your Workspaces verification code email, the code contained in that email, to enter the folder with applications. Applications will be organized by team, so each group of 3 people will be given a team number, team 1, 2, 3, etc. You'll navigate to your team's folder and view only the applications that have been assigned to your team. We ask that you not download the applications to your personal computers. Please view them in WatchDocs and read them and score them based on your reading within WatchDocs. This is just a security concern to make sure that all of the applications remain in one place. All of the WatchDocs emails will come from this address in blue, and if you're not receiving these emails by February 15th and you expect that you should be, definitely check your spam folder, and if they aren't there, you can reach out to either grants officer Anna Aerosmith or Carla Garcia. They're both wonderful people, and you can also reach out to the Farm to School inbox, of course. And I also want to add that the grant officer responsible for each grant, the one who you should reach out to, is dependent on which grant type you're assigned. For implementation grants, those teams would reach out to Anna Aerosmith. For teams with planning or training grants, they would reach out to Carla Garcia. To submit your scores and feedback, you'll use PartnerWeb. I'm about to go through a series of slides that walk you through what we are going to do in PartnerWeb. PartnerWeb is an online SharePoint site. Some people on this call may have used PartnerWeb before, others may have never used PartnerWeb. If you have used PartnerWeb before, then your access credentials for your existing account should work so that you can access the materials you'll need to review and score applications. Now I'll be walking you through the system, beginning with the login page on PartnerWeb. PartnerWeb recently updated, so their website looks a little bit different from how it has looked in the past. Some of the links are in slightly different locations, but overall the information that's available is the same. The steps that you will follow are the same if you've reviewed grants with us previously. And if you have any questions, you can always email PartnerWeb's help, or you can email the Farm to School inbox. You'll begin logging into PartnerWeb by navigating to their website. Your username will usually be your first initial and your last name. If someone else already has that username, then it may be slightly different. And you'll also receive an email from PartnerWeb that contains your password. Save that password because it is definitely going to be a string of interesting characters and special characters and numbers. It may be difficult to remember, so just holding on to that email is probably the best way to guarantee that you're always able to get into PartnerWeb. And we expect next week to be setting up everybody's PartnerWeb account. So keep an eye out for those emails. If by the time the review process starts, you have not received any communications from PartnerWeb, you can use the forgot password option to have the email resent to you. This is what it will look like. This is the first page that you see when you log into PartnerWeb. And you may notice that there's nothing on this page about Farm to School in particular, but you can easily find the Farm to School page if you look under Program Centers at the top. And then it will be a drop-down box where you select Management, Technology, and Finance Program Area, parentheses, not OIT. There are two. One is OIT, one is not OIT. Choose the one that is not OIT. You can also search for sites using the search bar at the top, which I've also highlighted in red here. Once you've chosen Management, Technology, and Finance, not OIT, you will be brought to this page, and now you can see on the left side in the sidebar there is an SM Farm to School Grants link. That is how you will navigate to the grant review website. And once you've navigated to that grant review website, this is the image that will reach you. All of the review support materials, the RSA, the score sheets, the projects that involve one-sheeters, links to this webinar, PDFs of the webinar slides, they will all be available on this website for you to access and to make sure you have all the materials you need to review these applications successfully. When you're ready to actually begin reviewing applications, you'll go to step 1 on the left side of the screen, find your team and assignments. You'll then navigate to this page where you'll find your team assignment by clicking the panelist ID header. That'll sort in alphabetical order by PartnerWeb ID, the information you use to log in, and then you'll find your own along with the team number next to it. Then you can identify the applications that you've been assigned to review by looking at the table on the right, and you can click the arrow next to your name, next to your team number, and that'll expand that field so you can see what grant type you've been assigned as well. And you can see in this example that that Team 1 has been assigned planning. You'll see that same information. It may say planning, it may say implementation, or it may say training, depending on what type of application you've been assigned to review. But remember, you will only be assigned one grant type. There will be no groups with mixed planning and training or training and implementation. It will only be one type of application throughout the entire process. This is a screen from a previous version of PartnerWeb. I've used it because the new version of PartnerWeb does not yet have this information loaded into it. But when it does, it will have the FNS ID information. The FNS ID will let you fill out the score sheet and ensure that the score sheet corresponds with the proper application. This is an extremely important step. It lets the program office know this review goes with this application. Also note that each application has a name, application name. This is also a very important step. This will also help match the correct score sheet to the correct application. This information will be entered manually by reviewers into the score sheet. Now that you have that information, you're ready to go to step 2 and begin filling out score sheets. I've highlighted 2 sections on this page. One is the sidebar with step 2, and that literally says step 2. The other are the tabs at the top that say planning, implementation, or training score sheet. You can also navigate to the relevant page by using those tabs at the top. That will bring you to this page, the scoring for the type of application you're responsible for, in this case planning. And you'll use the link that I've drawn a box around in red to begin adding a score sheet. This is the page where you will enter the information that was discussed on the previous slides, the panelist ID, your own team number, and the FNS ID. And then you will go about, you'll proceed through this score sheet, entering your scores for each section. And you'll notice also that there are free response areas where you can enter the explanation of your scores in each section. If PartnerWeb will not allow you to save a draft of a form, if you have to stop working at any time, say you have to move on to another task, or your eyes are tired from looking at so many grants, which can absolutely happen, you need to fill in a 0 for each field. You need to put some type of content in each field and then choose save at the bottom. But if you put, as this slide recommends, 0s, please do not leave it like that. Please remember that you have to come back and finish this application. It will not submit the scores until you've certified, but do remember that this is an unfinished application and that you do not accidentally submit an application that has 0s on it. Then you'll be able to navigate to this page where you can see the score sheets that have been completed so far, or the score sheets that are in progress. If you're having difficulty finding a particular score sheet, as mentioned, each person will have about 10 grants that they're responsible for. You can sort them via the arrows at the top or the fields at the top, and that'll let you find the applications you're working on more easily. Here's a wonderful picture of some people engaged in farm to school activities. And while we rest on this slide, maybe gather our breath because we're just so enthusiastic about all the content we've been receiving so far, we're going to take a deep breath and then move on to tips for success, which will be covered by Anna Aerosmith, our grants officer.
Thanks, Travis. Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Aerosmith, and as Travis mentioned, I'm one of the 2 grants officers working on this project. So I'm just going to go through some tips for success for you all as you are reviewing the applications. And a lot of this is based on experiences that we've had in prior years with these grant reviews. So Travis already mentioned that the point allocations go from 0 up to a 20. And there is a guidance document, and I think he had a screenshot of that earlier in the slides. And we just want you to remember that, let's say somebody does something and it's good. It's not great, but it's good, and they met the criteria. You know, that can be anywhere from a 12 to a 16, depending on the level. You don't have to give them just these numbers here for the categories. You can give them the numbers in between, so it's more of a flexible scale. And when you are awarding the numerical scores, you want to make sure that they align with your written feedback. You don't want to give somebody a 20, but then your written feedback is, yeah, it was good. They did okay. You know, they could have done more, but this was adequate. And then that's not going to be a 20. Those two would not correlate. Again, as Travis also mentioned, and we bring this up a lot because it's something that we're constantly trying to coax out of our reviewers as much as we possibly can. Your written comments are really important. The proposal strengths and weaknesses are essentially what it's going to come down to. We might have 2 applications with the same numerical score, and we have to make a choice between the 2, or 2 applications that are so close and they're right at the line. We're going to go and we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses to help us determine, which way we're going to go with that. Also, if an application is not awarded, we do use the feedback to provide debriefs to the applicants to help them write a better application in the future. As Travis mentioned, we do share the feedback with applicants if they request it. We don't say who provided the feedback, but we do share the feedback. So you want to please use proper grammar and punctuation because this is quite a job for us later on in the grant period, and it's helpful if you can do your part by making this stuff ready to go. I will say, as a grants officer that works on Farm to School and several other programs, Farm to School does an excellent job of providing really thoughtful feedback for the applicants to use for future applications. Probably one of the better programs that I've seen as far as the depth of the feedback that they provide, and that's because we sweet talk it out of you. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to go on some examples of written feedback. Again, we want you to focus on the strengths and weaknesses, and you can certainly be critical. We want you to be critical, but we just want you to make sure that it's constructive criticism. So you want it to be justified, and again, make it link to your numerical score. So here's some examples of some strengths here. The school district has strong community partners ready to help implement the project. The district aims to increase the variety of local products to include protein, for example, turkey and beef. Those are good strengths, and they're well-described strengths. A well-described weakness would be something like the budget narrative did not clearly explain all the proposed project expenses, particularly the supplies and equipment. additional details about how the proposed activities will accomplish the target goals would improve the proposal. Both of these are thorough. They address what the weakness is, and then they say why it's a weakness. Some less than ideal feedback, and as somebody who used to review grants, I get the impulse to say, what are they thinking? Are they crazy? Or just, you're reading and reading and reading and you come across something that knocks your socks off and you write great in the margins. Or a note to yourself saying, see page 7 for a really good example of this activity. That's a good way to make a note, but then before you submit your feedback, you want to flesh that out until it is a more thorough strength or weakness similar to the ones on the last slide. After you write out your feedback, you want to ask yourself if it passes muster for what we're asking for. Again, you make sure it's grammatically correct with appropriate punctuation in case it's something that we're going to be sending out to the applicants. Is your feedback clear and actionable? If you say that it's missing something or something is weak, does it give an idea of how that can be fixed or what they can do to ensure that it doesn't happen again? Is your feedback offensive? If you need to rant, just call me up. I'm here for you, but we don't want to put that in the written feedback. Does your feedback reflect that you've closely reviewed the materials? We want to know that you know what you're talking about in your feedback. We don't want you to, make some vague statement that could be a generic response. And then again, does it align with the amount of points deducted if it's negative feedback? Okay, so we've got some examples. An example of some bad feedback. This section is vague and lacked details. That is something that I use often actually, but then it's followed by more information. It's one of my pet peeves of reading grants is, they can be vague and lack details. That's a legitimate beef, but it's not the only feedback that you want to provide. So if you want to beef it up a little bit, you can say more detail is needed to justify how each budget line was arrived at, especially travel and equipment. So now we know that it is more vague and it's related to the budget and the budget doesn't have enough information or the narrative doesn't have enough information to justify the budget, particularly these two sections. It still doesn't give a lot of useful information to the applicant, but hopefully they could figure it out. But what we'd really like to see is to provide feedback that looks more like this one. More detail is needed to justify how the budget line items were estimated, especially travel and equipment sections. Travel costs appear to be excessive, equipment to be purchased for kitchen is not specified, and a justification was not included. Personnel costs for the farm appear to be too low to attract and hire a qualified individual. That gives the applicant a lot to work with if they're planning to apply again the following year. Don't be mean. Like I said, I'm here. If you want to call me, if you need to vent, go for it. But in your written feedback, be clear, direct, and honest, but please be nice. Here's an example of a mean. We'll call this passive-aggressive mean. The sustainability plan is weak. It appears that they believe everything will just work once they get the ball rolling. It is a bit too simple for the reality of a project like this. You're going to send that applicant running, and they're never going to want to apply for a grant from us again. Here's a nicer version of the same feedback. The proposal would be strengthened with clarification of how ongoing support of the project goals will be managed after the grant has ended with state and local funding. So reviewing the budget and budget narrative, and this is my wheelhouse here specifically. We do expect you to evaluate the budget to a degree. Both Carla and myself are going to be doing a deep dive into these budgets, and we're going to be looking at everything that they're asking for and making sure that it's allowable and well justified. But we need you to lay the groundwork for us first, because there's some things that we're going to assume have been done by the time we receive them. So your responsibilities for evaluating the budget, you want to make sure that the budget narrative discusses all of the items that are listed in their itemized budget. So if their itemized budget says, they've got 72 widgets in their budget, or they've got a personnel position that they're funding salary and benefits for, I don't expect you to say, oh, this is a ridiculous price for these widgets, or this is too high a salary for this person. But I do expect you to say, oh, yes, they've got this person listed in their budget to pay their salary, and the position itself is described in the narrative. Or these widgets that are in the budget, they are described in the narrative, and they are part of the overall project. We want the expenses to align with the project goals and objectives. We really love it when they will put the objective number in their budget narrative, but sometimes that's a little more than we should expect. We just want to make sure that all of the anticipated project expenses are accounted for in the budget and budget narrative. The budget narrative should justify the cost. If a partner is receiving a portion of the funding, the rationale for that should also be listed in the budget. And all of this should be given point values when you're scoring the budget. What does not need point values, but we want you to look for it and just make a note in the comments, a lot of the applicants forget to budget for the travel to attend the face-to-face meeting with USDA personnel. So we do want you to look for that and make sure that it is in the budget, and if it's not, just make a note of it, and then Carla or myself will take it from there. Also, when you're looking at the budget, if you see a discrepancy in the numbers, you don't have to let that affect your score, but please do flag it for us. We're going to be looking for that stuff ourselves, but if you notice it, please flag it so we don't miss it. And you don't need to worry about determining if an item is allowable. We've got some things that are in the gray area, and there's a lot of different factors that might determine if something is allowable or not. If something seems weird to you, again, certainly flag it, but don't let that be reflected in your numerical scores. General info, key steps for your successful review. As Travis already mentioned, make sure that you can log into PartnerWeb as soon as you have that information. You definitely need to be able to log in by February 15th, but if you get your information and you get it set up sooner, go ahead and try to log in and let us know if you're having any issues so we can help you and get it rectified as soon as possible. As Travis already mentioned, make sure that your scan your applications for conflict of interest. If you see something, if you've worked with somebody before, or if you have any type of personal or professional relationship with any of the applicants that have been assigned to you, let us know as soon as possible so we can make that swap with another team before they might start reviewing their applications. We like you to allow at least 2 hours per application for review, so when you're planning your time, allow at least 2 hours, and you want to spread them out across the application period. If you try to do everything in a day or 2 days, you're going to be burnt out, and by the time you get to your last one, they're not going to get the full attention that the first one may have received. Again, we want you to complete your independent reviews by March 1st. Be reliable, stay in touch with your team lead and be responsive to scheduling requests. Let your team lead know if there's any conflicts that you might have with scheduling so you can get your team calls on the calendar as soon as possible. And be open to the opinions of others, and that's something that you will deal with more during the calls. Also during your calls, if you decide to revise a score based on the team discussion, again, just please support your changes with revised strengths and weaknesses as necessary in PartnerWeb. And that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more when it's time for you to actually have your calls with the team leads, with the rest of your teams, I'm sorry. So I'm going to turn it back over to Travis, and he is going to tell you where to go if you need help with anything.
Thank you so much, Anna. You did a great job, and I appreciate your availability, which is what brings us to the contact slides for asking for help. Anna said, as she mentioned, she's available for people to call if they have issues. Her email is here on this page, along with Carla Garcia's if you're having problems with watchdogs. If you have issues with PartnerWeb, contact the Farm to School team using the email address you've been receiving communications from, farmtoschool@usda.gov. And PartnerWeb also provides a support number you can call. It's there on this slide, and again, the slides will be sent out after this presentation, so you'll have access to that number there, and it will also be available on the PartnerWeb site once you're able to log in. If you have any issues with conflict of interest, Anna and I have both mentioned this. Please contact us as soon as possible using the Farm to School email, farmtoschool@usda.gov. And if you want to make sure that your response is processed as quickly as possible, please know your team number and grant type. Tell your issue clearly, and if there are any screenshots you can provide, especially if it's an issue with PartnerWeb or watchdogs, make sure that you have the screenshots contained within the email as well. All right, and here we're giving a big thumbs up to everybody who has stuck with us this far. Thank you everyone for your patience. We are going to quickly go through a recap, and then we've been receiving questions, and we've said we will have time at the end to address some of the questions that have come in through the chat box. If you are sitting and some questions have been percolating in your mind and they haven't been addressed at this point, start thinking about putting them in the chat box. We may get to them in these last few slides, but definitely don't want to leave any stone unturned if we can get to your question during this webinar. Here are the key dates. Now, start looking through the RFA and the reference materials. These are available on the Farm to School website, and we'll be sending out some information like the score sheets and the point allocation guidance so that people can see and be familiar with what they're going to be using while they are reviewing the applications. We will be distributing that information this week or early next week, and you will also be able to access that email once you can get into your PartnerWeb website. For early next week, February 11th through 13th, please check that PartnerWeb is functioning, that you've received the login emails, and that the password they gave you is working properly. Check and make sure that you'll be able to view the apps using watchdogs and scan over them. This means visually scan, not scan as in use an electronic scanner, but scan with your eyes the applications, including the supporting documents, the resumes, and the statements of support, and see if there are any conflicts of interest between you and this application. Again, if there are any conflict of interest issues, cannot emphasize this enough, contact farmtoschool@usda.gov. By March 1st, each individual should have independently reviewed around 10 proposals without any discussion about the applications amongst their team members. Submit individual scores and comments via PartnerWeb. Beginning the next week and March 4th and running through the 15th, participate in the scheduled team meetings. I do want to emphasize here the team meeting does not have to take place on March 4th or on March 15th in case anyone is, in case that's unclear. The team leads and the team members will work together to schedule a time within those dates that works for everybody to speak about the applications. And by March 15th, if you have any adjustments to make to your scores, including the comments and your justifications for your scores, please submit those via PartnerWeb. And then after the review process has concluded and we have received everybody's scores and we have downloaded that information from PartnerWeb, each of you should receive a feedback survey where you can give us more information about the review process. As I mentioned earlier, we do take this information into account. We have used this feedback to implement shorter narratives on the grants and to the restrictions on how many attachments an applicant can include to try and make the review process easier for everyone involved while still getting the best possible feedback and the most detailed information and scores that we're able to get. That brings us to the end of this presentation. My contact information is here. I said my name at the beginning in case anyone has forgotten. I am Travis Hearn. I'm the grants manager at the Office of Community Food Systems. You can contact me or any of the rest of the Farm to School team using the farmtoschool@usda.gov email, or you can call this number that I've also provided on this slide. And then I should have put Anna's information on here. Anna Aerosmith is the grants officer who helped me complete this training, and Carla Garcia is the other grants officer who will be responsible for planning and training grants. Now, if you have any questions, this is the time that we'll go through and try to address everyone's concerns. And if you have anything else that you're wondering here at the end of this presentation, please put it in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to you now in the next 10 minutes. One of the first questions asked is whether people on the waiting list have not received the conflict of interest form. Everyone should have received the conflict of interest form. If you have not, you can email the Farm to School email that's still on the slide that's on the screen, and we will get you the conflict of interest form as soon as possible. We are very much interested in having that information on file, and we want to make sure it's a quick turnaround. So if you have not received the conflict of interest form, email us and let us know, and we will get a form to you as soon as we can. Another question we received is whether team leads will also be reviewing the applications as a reviewer. Yes, they will. Team leads will be scoring applications. They will be going through the exact same process that reviewers are going through. So they'll know what issues you may have. They'll understand any difficulties that may arise during the review process because they are performing the exact same actions. That's a very good question. Another question is, if the applicants include more than 3 attachments, are we to review only the first 3 or any 3? I am going to defer to Anna on this. Anna, do you have a comment in response to this question?
I do. I would say the first 3 just so it's consistent on your team, so everybody's reviewing the same 3 attachments. What we do is we consolidate all of the files that come in through the application into one PDF, but the attachments will all be together in order. So just, review the first 3.
Thanks, Anna. My gut was telling me the first 3, but I am so glad I had you to confirm that and give additional clarification. We were also asked if we can print the applications. We absolutely prefer that the applications not be printed. Ideally, you'll only interface with the applications through WatchDocs. You should be able to read and collect all the information you need by viewing them in WatchDocs. And Anna, do you want to weigh on this one as also?
I'm going to reiterate what you said because that is what we want. If there are extenuating circumstances and you need to print an application, get in touch and let us know, and we can evaluate those on a case-by-case basis, but we prefer that you not. And I actually am going to jump ahead and answer another question that's related to this about can you download the applications on a government computer? Again, we prefer that you do not. Just because when the review process is over, we want to make sure that we have all of the applications and there aren't any other ones floating around out there.
Thank you, Anna. We received a question about PartnerWeb. Are we to receive a different /new PartnerWeb username or password just for this grant review? The answer to that is no. As I understand it, if you have an existing PartnerWeb account, you should be able to use your current login credentials and navigate to the Farm to School PartnerWeb site using those credentials. And another question about PartnerWeb is when the site will be available for us to access. We were somewhat delayed, as most of you are aware, through January when we were scheduled to implement all of the PartnerWeb updates. So we are still in the process of finalizing the last few updates to PartnerWeb. but our goal is to finish that as soon as possible and get the new accounts to people who need them and have the Farm to School website ready to go early next week at the latest. So that's an excellent question. Please keep an eye out for emails from PartnerWeb with information about access and from information about the content on the website from the Farm to School team. Our next question is on the independent review. Do we start with a high score or average score? That's a really good question. Anna, do you want to weigh in on this one to start?
Sure. You don't really start with any score. You want to take each criteria and evaluate it essentially anywhere from a 0 to 20. You don't want to start at a 10 or a 20 or I mean, I guess you kind of would start at a 0, but you're going to evaluate the criteria. You're going to evaluate the application based on the criteria, and you don't have a specific start point, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Anna. I want to keep an eye on the time and note that we have 4 minutes left in the scheduled time for this webinar. So if you have any questions, please, now is the time to submit them in the chat box while we're wrapping up this training, and we're going to do the best we can to finish them all, to answer them all during the time limit. If we're not able to answer your question here, please email the Farm to School inbox and we will get a response to you as soon as we can. While we're waiting on additional questions, we have one that is asking us about the review process, that we access applications in Watchdocs and submit scores and feedback via PartnerWeb, correct? Are we able to view the application and score sheets simultaneously? Or should we take notes as we go through the application to help us provide feedback for our scores? That's a really good question. I understand the concern if we're asking you to not download or print the applications, but you should be able to open the web pages in 2 different windows and view the, if you have 2 screens, then you could view one window on one screen, one on the other. If you only have one screen, then you can switch back and forth between windows, or you can line the 2 windows up side by side so that you're able to read the application on one screen and score the application on the other. You should be able to hopefully use your technology and both read the application and score it at the same time, but I understand the concern. And could we please repeat the name of the partner website? The partner website you will navigate to is Farm to School Grant Program. I will go back to the screenshot so that I'll go back to that part of the presentation so we can show it exactly. You'll land on this page in PartnerWeb, and you'll navigate to where it says Program Centers, and that will be a drop-down box, and of the Program Centers you will select the Management, Technology, and Finance, not OIT, and from there you'll navigate to the FM Farm to School Grants website. That should be the, I hope that addresses your question of what the name of the partner website is called. We are very much approaching the time to go. If you have an additional question and you didn't want to ask it on this webinar, or you think of it just after we conclude the webinar, absolutely email the Farm to School inbox, farmtoschool@usda.gov, and we will get a response to your question to you as soon as we're able. And one more reminder, if you have not received the conflict of interest form, please let us know. If you know that you have not submitted your conflict of interest form, please sign it and return it to the Farm to School inbox as soon as possible. We have one more question before we go. When will this recorded presentation be available? That is an excellent question. This recording will be available tomorrow afternoon at the very latest. With long presentations, it can take a while to download and process, so we're going to make that happen as quickly as possible. I know people are really eager to get the recording. You should have the recording tomorrow afternoon at the latest. So if you don't have it by the time you go home today, don't panic. We'll get it to you as soon as we can. And I will indeed send this recording out via email. Excellent question. And with that, I am going to, yes, one more comment about the recording. It will be a link, along with the slides. I will be sending the slides as an attachment also. And with that, I am going to stop recording and stop this meeting. I want to say thank you to everybody who has attended, and if you're watching this recording after the fact, thank you very much for doing your due diligence. We look forward to working with you over the next 4 weeks of the review process. Thank you very much.